Hey everybody. Okay, so we are finishing up the play Sweat by Lynn Nottage. So in this video I'm going to review Act 2 of the play, then I'm going to go over the presentation assignment and then the final paper memo assignment, both of which are due next week. So just like Act 1, Act 2 of Sweat begins with a scene from 2008 after Jason and Chris get out of jail. Jason visits his mother Tracy, who is now struggling with drug addiction. Chris visits his mother Cynthia, and she is no longer a manager at Olmsted's, but is working at a nursing home. She's a little surprised that Chris has gotten religious. Remember, he always has his Bible. And we find out that she no longer speaks with Tracy ever since whatever crime Chris and Jason did, quote unquote, went down. Then in scene 2, we're back to the year 2000. Everyone at the bar is arguing. Some of the machines at the factory have been taken away, and without machines to operate, the jobs for the workers are no longer there. Cynthia is explaining to the angry group that the management wants to renegotiate their salaries. Scene 3 takes place the next month, on Cynthia's birthday, but no one is there to celebrate with her. She's explaining to Stan how she had to lock her friends out of the factory, and she even had to lock out her son from the factory. And when Tracy and Jesse enter, there is palpable tension. Tracy then recalls a previous birthday with Cynthia when they were in Atlantic City gambling, and apparently Cynthia attacked a woman for talking to her husband Brucey. After reminiscing, Tracy asks Cynthia to walk out in solidarity with the striking workers, and Cynthia decides to stay. She declines. And we see how racism was a part of her decision. So on page 83, we see Cynthia's response, and she says, "I've stood on that line, same line since I was 19. I've taken orders from idiots who were dangerous, or even worse, racist. But I stood on line, patiently waiting for a break. I don't think you get it, but if I walk away, I'm giving up more than a job. I'm giving up all the time I spent standing on line waiting for one damn opportunity." Tracy says, "So you want us to feel sorry for you?" Cynthia responds, "I don't expect you to understand, babe. You don't know what it's been like to walk in my shoes. I've absorbed a lot of shit over the years, but I worked hard to get off that floor. Call me selfish, I don't care. Call me whatever you need to call me. But remember, one of us has to be left standing to fight." So here we see how Cynthia's achievement in management comes after a long struggle, and she's not willing to give up on this great opportunity. We know that Cynthia does not retain this management job, though. Remember, she's in a nursing home uniform when we see her in 2008. So her resistance to joining the strike here in 2000 really didn't even help her keep her job. Then in scene 4, Chris and Jason enter the bar to find Brucey strung out and alone. Chris is upset that Brucey's not doing well. He's visibly high. And Brucey's trying to explain to him what drove him back to drugs. And he says something happened when he was on the picket line. And this is on page 86. He says, "I was doing my rotation on the line, same as always. And it began to rain all at once, a downpour. Folks fled, but I just stood there. Couldn't move. I got soaked through to my skin. I still couldn't move. And finally someone pulled me into the tent to get dry. But my whole body was shaking. Wouldn't stop. It was scary. And I hadn't had that feeling of being out of control since my mother died." So Chris buys his dad a drink and starts to reminisce about his father when he was a Union hero. Chris says, "You taught me how to throw a rock. I remember the first time you walked the line." And Chris and Jason then get excited about standing up to management. Chris says he's not going to be a punk-ass bitch, quote-unquote. Brucey has a different opinion. He doesn't have any fight left in him, and he thinks they're misled. Brucey says, "You think they give a damn about your black ass? Let me tell you something. They don't even see you." The upper management that made the decision to send the jobs to Mexico, they really don't see the workers or their opinions. So the next scene, scene 5, takes place in October, and Stan is speaking with Oscar, who has picked up some part-time shifts at Olsted's. Stan advises him not to cross the picket line, but Oscar doesn't really seem to care. And just like other characters before him, he tells a story of how he deserves to be employed, that narrative of legitimacy. Remember, Tracy talked about her German grandpop who could build anything. Brucey talked about his dad who came north with just a Bible and a razor. Here we see Oscar's story, and he says, "Why are you coming at me that way? I'm not disrespecting you. I'm just trying to get paid, that's all. For 3 years I've been carrying nothing but crates. I've got $20 bills taped to my wall and a drawer full of motivational tapes. Got a jar of Buena Suerte from the Botanica and a candle that I keep lit 24/7. I keep asking for some good fortune. That's it. A little bit of money. That's it. My father, he swept up the floor in a factory like Olsted's. Those fuckers wouldn't even give him a union card. But he woke up every morning at 4 a.m. because he wanted a job in the steel factory, and it was the American way, so he swept fucking floors thinking, one day they'll let me in. I know how he feels. People come in here every day. They brush by me without seeing me. No, hello, Oscar. If they don't see me, I don't need to see them." So we see, no matter what story of legitimacy they tell, it seems there's always someone who has a story of why they deserve this employment and they're willing to work for less money. So Tracy comes in, orders a drink. She's been on the picket line answering phones for the union. She has to pay for her drink with loose change. She has nothing nice to say to Oscar. She calls him a scab. And a scab refers to someone who crosses a picket line, someone who, when union workers are on strike, the scabs work in their place, usually for less money than what the union is fighting for their workers. Oscar says he doesn't have any problem with Tracy, but she says, "You better believe it's personal for me." Then scene 6 is the climactic scene. It's the day before election day. Jason and Chris come into the bar after a fight between the union workers on strike and the scabs that are going in to replace them. They're both amped up, and Chris is starting to feel a little discouraged about union tactics, and he says on page 98, "Now is the moment. You're right, Stan. Maybe we should move on. We can complain until kingdom come, blah, blah, blah. That shit gets old real fast. I'm out there on the picket lines every morning. I shout, 'Fuck you' at a bunch of pathetic, hungry guys. I feel good and superior about it all for like 5 minutes, and then reality hits. They're inside. And then I think about my pops. Who wants that shit?" Jason doesn't seem to understand what Chris is getting at. Tracy comes out of the bathroom, Jesse rouses, and they're all drinking when Oscar comes in to pick up the rest of his stuff. So he's not working at the bar anymore. We can assume he's working at Olsted's. And this causes a big increase in tension. Jason and Tracy insult him while Stan tries to keep the peace. And one thing that Stan says I think is really insightful, and this is on page 101 to 102. Stan says, "Look, Olsted is a prick. If he was there, I wouldn't stop you. In fact, I'd hold him down for you to give him a proper beating. But Oscar, he's another story. He's going to walk out of here, and you're going to keep your mouth shut, or I." Jason says, "What? All I'm saying is that he needs to understand the price of that dinner he's putting on his table." Stan shouts at him, "What the fuck do you want him to do? Huh? It ain't his fault. Talk to Olsted, his cronies, fucking Wall Street. Oscar ain't getting rich off your misery." And so this is an instance of what Brucey earlier called the blame game. Who is at fault for the workers losing their jobs? Stan points to the owner of the company who makes the decisions, the one who made the decision to move the machines to Mexico and renegotiate the workers' salaries. Stan's argument, however, falls on deaf ears as Jason, spurred on by his mother, attacks Oscar. When Chris tries to break it up, he's hit by Oscar, and that sets him off, so then both of them are beating on Oscar. Then, sadly, when Stan tries to break it up, he is hit in the head twice. So I think there's a lot of contributing causes to this outburst that ends up with Oscar getting beaten up and Stan hitting his head. And I think these causes are different for Jason and Chris. Jason's fighting for his own job and also for his mother. Chris is fighting for his own job and also for his father. But, you know, he can see past his anger and he sees that the scabs are, you know, quote, pathetic, hungry guys that are not that different for him. And so I think Chris's story is the more tragic one here because he's trying to get out of this town. Remember, he wanted to go and be a teacher, go to college. He wanted to get away from the factory, but he ends up getting drawn into this conflict and he goes to jail. So the next scene is in 2008. Chris and Jason both speak with their parole officers. Jason's homeless. He's in terrible shape. Chris is feeling hopeless. Scene 8's the final scene, and it's like a reunion of sorts. Everyone's back at the bar, but look who's managing the bar but Oscar. The Olsted's factory is gone. Chris asks what's on tap, and he actually gets an interesting response. Remember, that was the joke for a while, because Stan said it was always the same stuff on tap. They cater apparently to mostly college students now that the factory is gone. So then Jason enters and Stan enters. Stan's still working there, but he has brain damage from a traumatic brain injury, and he can't hear very well. The stage directions say that the four men, quote, await the next moment in a fractured togetherness, end quote. And so here they are all together again, but they're still separate, all very much in their own issues, I think. So what do you make of this ending? I've read of this play being called a tragedy. So what do you think is the most tragic part about it? I hope you include in your presentation a little discussion of this ending. The presentation will be graded on the background of the author, the summary of the play. That's where you should put your discussion of the ending. Your analysis, which is how well you answer the prompt question, and the visual representation, you know, how well you organize your presentation, and then also your response to another student's presentation. So you can see the rubric. It's posted in the module right after the assignment. So this week there's nothing due. I'm going to now go over the presentation assignment that is next week, and then I'm going to go over the final paper memo that's also due next week. So for the presentation, answer the following question using specific references to the play Sweat to back up your claims. So what are the various influences that lead Jason and Chris to attack Oscar? And by influences, that could be socio-cultural, economic, or familial. And then what does this play suggest as the causes of racism and racist violence? So presentations should be no longer than 5 minutes, and they must be in the form of either a video of you speaking or a PowerPoint with the voiceover narration. Presentations should provide background on the author, summary of the play, analysis, and how you answer the question using specific references to the text. And then remember, you have to respond to another student's presentation. When you respond to another student's presentation, you want to basically state whether you agree or disagree with their main claims and what evidence you can find to support it. If you agree, can you point to another aspect of the text that supports it? If you disagree, where are you finding that in the text? So, this week's module, remember, there's no assignments to complete. It's next week in week 14 where you'll find the assignment for the presentation and for the final paper memo. So let me move into that assignment now. So once you finish reading the play, think about what you could write for your final paper. What texts do you find the most interesting? What do you think is so interesting about them? I also think it would be a good idea for you to go back and read over the discussion boards for each week to, refresh your memory on what we studied and to get some ideas flowing. So, just a little overview of what we've done so far and what we've read. We looked at ideas on gender in the beginning of the semester. We read those 2 stories about masculinity in week 2. You could look at characters struggling with what it means to be a man in this world, or like a young man coming of age. There's the Richard Wright story. There's the T. Corrigan Boyle story, Greasy Lake. There's the Junot Diaz story, Drown. There's Sherman Alexie's story, Lone Ranger and Tonto Fist Fight in Heaven. There's the Ngugi wa Thiong'o story, Wedding at the Cross. There's also Kurt Vonnegut's story, Harrison Bergeron. You could focus on issues of cultural assimilation. We read several stories where we see one culture being taken over by another culture, or being colonized by another culture. There's Ngugi wa Thiong'o's story, Wedding at the Cross, where we see the British colonization of Kenya. There's Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's story, The Headstrong Historian, where we see the British colonization of Nigeria. There's Sherman Alexie's story, Lone Ranger and Tonto Fist Fight in Heaven. Remember, he is a Native American living in Washington State, and so we see the issue of being a Native person with the invading white American culture. We also see that in Leslie Marmon Silko's story, Lullaby. There are many texts that show characters coping with the past, with an upsetting or a violent past. There's Ruins of a Great House by Derek Walcott. There's the novel Beloved. There's also stories that just represent, that show representations or symbolism of the past, like in the story Everyday Use by Alice Walker. The story Sunrise Sunset by Edwidge Dandakat. Also the play Sweat by Lynn Nottage. All this, many characters look to the past for that narrative of legitimacy as to why they deserve to be there and why they deserve to be employed. Another important similarity I see in these stories is parent-child relationships, intergenerational issues. There's several stories that show the relationship between mothers and their children, like the novel Beloved, Alice Walker's story Everyday Use, Leslie Marmon Silko's story Lullaby, The Headstrong Historian by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Junot Diaz's story Drown, remember Junior lives with his mother, Edwidge Dandakat's Sunrise Sunset. We also see stories that depict father-child relationships, or the father's legacy. Think of Brucey and Chris in the play Sweat. Think of Douglas Jones and Miriamu in Wedding at the Cross. Think of Seamus Haney's poem Digging in the beginning of the semester, and also Sylvia Plath's poems Daddy and Colossus. We have several stories that show absent fathers, families that are missing a father, like Beloved. Hallie never makes it up north with Setha and her children. There's Drown by Junot Diaz. His parents are separated. His father lives elsewhere. And then there's Jason in the play Sweat. Jason's father passed away before the play begins. And I think if he had, that kind of guidance in his life, he might not have ended up in such a bad shape in the end. So you could also focus on social class. The play Sweat is all about the working class and the struggles with the upper management. There's also a focus on class conflict in Ngugi wa Thiong'o's story, Wedding at the Cross. So that's just a couple ideas to get you thinking. Again, go back and read through the discussion boards to refresh your memory and to hopefully generate some ideas for your final paper. So next week, you need to submit your final paper memo and try to write about 100 or 250 words, because I think get those ideas out and see what ideas start flowing. So remember, this week there was nothing due. You should be working on your Sweat presentation and completing your final paper memo. Remember, I'm always available via email if you have any questions, and we can always set up a time to meet and collaborate if you want to have a face-to-face conversation. Remember, I am here to help, and I look forward to hearing your ideas.